Good afternoon and good morning to all those who are joining us. This is Modern Treasury's Tech Talk. Welcome to our chat. Today, we're going to be talking to Erica Libby from our product team and Brian McKinney from our engineering team, both of who have earned their stripes in the enterprise world of payments. So I'm really excited for the discussion. And I'm Molly Fisher. I lead the enterprise sales team here at Modern Treasury. So I'm going to ask Erica to kick off with an intro of herself.
Great. Thanks so much, Molly. Really excited to be here. And thank you so much for having me. I'm a product manager here at Modern Treasury. I lead our enterprise platform team. Prior to Modern Treasury, I worked at Venmo and PayPal, where I led our growth teams, and very excited to be here and chat about all things enterprise payments. Over to you, Brian.
Hey, Mo, I was just chuckling to myself because I'm literally wearing stripes when you said that. But hey, Erica, hey, Molly, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I'm the head of payments engineering here at Modern Treasury. Prior to joining, I was the head of payments or the head of engineering for payment products at Square. And then prior to this, I've held senior leadership roles at Workday. So certainly seen a lot of kind of enterprise from both sides.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about how large companies can modernize their payments infrastructure with a focus on driving innovation to meet their business requirements. So, in talking with customers every day, the challenge is not moving a dollar from point A to point B with payments. We all know there's many ways to do that, but it's really the second order complications that begin to compound complexity as enterprises scale. And that underlying technology that powers the complexity is what we'll be focusing on today. So we'll get into some good details. We know that enterprises also have built their own programs and processes and workflows, and we hear that day in and day out from our own customers. And that's really why modularity is so important in the enterprise. And we'll talk more about that as well. So before we get started, a couple just house cut. One, we're recording a session. It will be available to all the registrants in the coming days. And two, we will be taking questions from the audience. So you can ask questions using the Q&A tab. You should see that at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to your question live, we will follow up with you. So please don't be shy and ask away. That's what these talks are for you guys. And we're excited to kick in. So I'll get right to it. Erica, let's start with you. I'd love to understand what are the different components of a payment system. And if you think about the building blocks, the large building blocks actually in most enterprises, what are we talking about specifically?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, payment systems in large enterprises and even in smaller companies are extremely complicated. There is so much going on and so much that has to go right to make payment systems work. I think the other thing before delving into the specifics is that payments are really just so important to not only being an effective business, but of course, building trust with your customers and really delivering on that promise. And so having all the right components and all the right things is just so critical to being effective. And so when I think about an effective and strong payment system, there's really five key components that I and we Modern Treasury think about. To the first and foremost, of course, is payment initiation. And that can range from bank-based payments with traditional rails like ACH to modern rails like FedNow, card-based payments from obviously accepting things like credit cards and debit cards to pushing payments to cards using things like push to card, and then everything in between. So obviously, I think for most of us, that's the first thing that comes to mind when we think about our payment systems. But there's also quite a bit more. There's reconciliation. So that's keeping track of all the payments and reconciling them against your bank statements, against cash, making sure the money that's supposed to go out goes out to the right people. There's obviously compliance, which for those of us who've worked in big companies, everything from KYC to KYB, AML regulations, all of those things are just so critical. Ledgering, of course, keeping track of who owes who money, where the money belongs, and who it belongs to. And then last and certainly not least is cash visibility and treasury. So everything from just understanding where your funds are and which accounts, what you're earning on those accounts, FX rates, all of that fun stuff is really critical as well. And so there's really lots and lots of pieces and they're all interconnected. And I think the last piece I'll just mention is that this really spans a lot of different teams. So it's not just, hey, we have a payment system in our company, everybody's on the same team working together. This really brings in everyone from engineering to product to FP&A to compliance and legal and all across the board. And there's really lots going on here. But I think the more complicated and the more going on, there's more opportunity for optimizations, for improvements, and things that can really drive the business forward.
I think one thing I want to touch on that you hit there, Erica, is yeah, there's a lot of complexity, right? And it can be daunting from any perspective from one of those stakeholders just to even look at and even trying to understand the full flow. And you may have just one section of it, but the whole thing's gotta fit together to really be, effective. And I think as we think about these systems in enterprise, right, and where folks want to take them, it's one part digital transformation, right? It's this idea of, hey, I've got all of what may look like legacy systems or things that don't speak well together. And then the whole pipe is opaque. You don't understand the flow from beginning to end. And then it's one part competitive edge, right? As well, right? I think folks, especially given the rate environment and given how fast technology is moving, I think they also do this, are looking at their systems with a new lens, right? Which is, hey, this is actually an area where if I can start to make small incremental change in this kind of modular sense, that I can actually start to drive not only greater visibility and greater buy-in from these stakeholders, greater communication, but also an area where you can drive a competitive edge. I think that's, again, looking at the external markets, there's this idea of efficiency. You want to drive efficiency. And I think given the banking crisis that was in March, I think a lot of folks are re-examining their systems and thinking about it from an anti-fragile perspective, right? Hey, this is an area where didn't shine a lot of lights before, but now it's something that given all this change, given the rate environment, given this crisis, given this focus on, new regulatory, that's certainly an area that is top of mind for a lot of folks.
And I think those are problems that we hear time and time again from modern treasury customers is they want that flexibility to add that additional rail or to Brian's point, many companies are dealing with some manual issue that happened that highlighted a bigger problem in their stack that they hadn't maybe looked at, or it should have just been more readily available information to them than finding it 30 days later. Brian, were you going to add something?
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you just touched on, Molly, and what I highlight, I think that's the difference between today. I'm looking at kind of modern SaaS offerings and where the technology is going. Companies, modern treasury being a great example in the sense, and where we were like even 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, Square built everything, right? Because you had to, right? And when it's all the way from just basic Rails, all the way up to reconciliation, all the way up into the card acquiring stack, and even the bridging and the data aspect over into the back office and the GL, because it just wasn't there. You had to do it. And I'm sure Erica, like Venmo and PayPal were probably in a similar space. And it is a little bit of a kind of a mentality change as a leader, especially in that kind of a modern forward looking enterprise that look like, I don't necessarily have to build all these things, right? And there's real opportunities to go and explore the space. And I don't have to upset the entire anthill, right? To focus and innovate. So I think that's a big difference between even, gosh, maybe 5 years ago and today. It's moved so fast and it's just created so much opportunity and honestly, an opportunity to, Erica said, innovate, but innovate in almost a risk mitigated way. You really choose your own adventure without kind of endangering, the enterprise.
For sure. For sure. I'll pose a new question. We'll start, Erica, with you. I know we have a handful of providers in this market. So we have ERPs to newer platforms like MT, Modern Treasury. Why is there not a solution that fits the needs enterprises have? And why are the patchwork of systems so frequent that we see? Probably hits on what Brian just said a little bit too, right? It's like the age old question.
And I think there's so many reasons that there are too many systems in this space. And I think to me, the sort of primary one is that when we talked about that payment stack earlier and those five kind of different components, a lot of those components are managed by different teams or different functions. And ultimately, what each of those teams needs as their sort of primary goal can be quite different. The team that's managing payment initiation at a Venmo or a Square is likely building in-house, direct to bank, direct to the networks, whatever it might be, because that's core infrastructure. And so they want to build it themselves. And then you've got teams like in accounting who are focused on the general ledger and focused on the accounting software. And that's where things like ERPs are the right solution. And then maybe you have a treasury team who's really focused on hey, how do I optimize my interest rates that I'm earning on my different currencies? And how do I manage cash balances across different countries and different places? And the solutions that solve for that are also quite different. And so I think it comes a bit from a place of disparate teams and also disparate goals of what's the most important thing. And then software companies who said, you know what? I'm going to focus on solving one of these problems super, super well because my buyer is the same. And then this whole mess is really complicated. And I think if I try and tackle it all, it's going to be too hard. So I'm just going to focus on this one buyer and this one problem. And so I think that's the history and the legacy was that it was just different groups, different teams, and software that was just focused on solve one problem at a time. And now we're in a place in a universe where software, as Brian said, has come so far and payments have come so far that we can actually start to think about, hey, how do all of these things work together and help the business improve if we can actually connect the dots and bring the data together, like Brian's story. Hey, maybe that would have been identified sooner if the accounting team was using the same software as the payments initiation team. And so I think that's a history, but I think today we're really evolving to a place where companies like Modern Treasury are saying, can we solve this in a more holistic way and create that data visibility, that money movement visibility that really help connect these teams together and solve all the problems well. So I think that's really the challenge that often teams have to overcome in order to make substantial improvements in their money movement space.
Yeah, I think something else though too, Erica, that really resonates with me is, yeah, I think at least you built a niche. That's how you naturally build a business, right? You build a niche, you find a place, you exploit it, and you sell to your buyer. But I also wonder if this in this kind of day and age that, leadership, right? So you look at your C levels, right? Your CFOs, your chief accounting officers, your CIOs, your CTOs, like there's CISOs, right? There's this whole spectrum of leadership, right? That is grown up, right? In a sense, in this like digital modern age, right? And they're aware of all the kind of ins and outs and pitfalls and really advocate well for, hey, we don't need a system that's just worries about this, right? It needs to worry about how it fits into our bigger ecosystem, right? That's the CIO's hat in a lot of ways, or the CTO's hat. Then you have the CISO, right? Who's saying, hey, that's great. Let's buy a system that also adheres to all these things that we worry about from a security perspective. And by the way, the fewer moving parts, the better, right? And I think in this case, this person operating in this CIO role would say the same. Yeah, fewer moving pieces is generally better. And then I think you get over the CFO role as well. And they're like, hey, here's the things that I really care about. For pre-IPO, right? Like, how do I get a path? So I have understanding and clearance to get to come to IPO, or if they're post-IPO, hey, I have all this regulatory and auditability requirements. So those also need to be factored in. And so if we have all these disparate systems, just the level of effort and work and like the kind of the fear that there's always some skeleton in the closet that's not being accounted for. And I think when these leaders, to your point, Eric, really start to talk and say, hey, our concerns are actually one and the same. At the end of the day, we want a thriving, capable business. I think it really is driving a lot of this kind of digital transformation. Again, also back to this idea that if we're this much more efficient, then we're this much more competitive in our particular industry. And in some ways, can almost even think about our payment stack as almost a profit center at some level.
And I think you can also see it coming together as a, hey, can we spend more resources and more energy on the pirating side of things and the innovation side of things instead of on the Navy side of things? We have our house in order. We can take more of those engineering resources and more of those data resources. I think one of the things we often found at Venmo and PayPal was that a lot of the data resources and teams that we had were spent working on some of these things don't add up, these things don't match work, and less on the, hey, let's do the analytics to identify, can we improve conversion in the funnel if we focus on this particular piece or we optimize these different things? And bringing all that into one place, I think, especially on the data side, can really help focus those teams and those groups of people on identifying business opportunities instead of making sure that nothing has gone awry and nothing is out of place.
And
Sort of that idea of freeing up their time to focus on innovating and what they do best. Let other vendors handle what isn't their core competency. I think that's a theme I know I've seen throughout my career in enterprise.
it's something I always tell my teams, like, how do we move up the value stack? This is fine for now. This is not where you want to do for the rest of your career. And it really holds us back from accelerating. So how do we think about moving up that value stack?
Yeah, for sure. So given all that, and I think all both really good, you guys both made really great points. Brian, maybe starting with you, how do you think companies can manage the complexity and why is that important?
Yeah, I think the complexity is natural, right? I think as Eric was highlighting, you make decisions with the best information of that day, with the budget you have that day, with the kind of the whatever directive you're given, and in some cases, you're just trying to make your life easier. And so these systems just naturally evolve and become, almost organic in the sense, both from the software that's in play, the ecosystem that's there, and then even the organizations that are around it. And as a leader, it can be, as I said before, it's very daunting, right? Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of folks realize, hey, there's a lot of opportunities here, and I see a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, you also don't want to be the person who brought your lifeblood to a halt, right? Because all of a sudden payments stop flowing or you can't reconcile, or all of a sudden what you thought was from a cash position isn't actually a cash position. So I think it's very daunting. And I think it really goes back to, again, to play with the kind of the Navy's, versus pirates theme, and really taking advantage of what the market has today and reevaluating, like, where do you want to spend your resourcing? People are focused on efficiency, right? And so I think this really comes back to this idea of modularity, right? Find a small part, one stage in your pipeline, right? Maybe it's reconciliation, right? We know a lot of companies struggle with that particular area, and it's been written off as this one. Reconciliation's hard. It's always been hard. It will continue to be hard. And so actually, let's reevaluate that assumption, right? And really then come back to this idea of modularity. Can I work with a vendor, or can I kick off a small pirate? Pick up a
Yes,
small
you can hire
pilot.
one of those as well.
And yeah, I know that'd be great. Pirate as a service, that'd be awesome. And really kick off a small pilot and work out there with a vendor who's good at this thing, but also has a larger play, right? Again, getting back on is trade one niche software for another piece of niche software, right? And go back to, hey, there's a specific problem that I want to solve. Or yes, there's lots of problems end to end, but it's hard to solve all those problems at once. Pick a very small area, one that you're very focused, one that's, I am hung out, it's true. And focus on it, right? And then say, hey, let's solve this. And if you can solve it, especially if you can do it in a way where you reduce your headcount or you reduce the amount of money you're spending on it, then you've proven value, right? You've proven that, hey, this is a success. And, oftentimes as we see in a lot of enterprises, success begets success, right? Once you have momentum, it's easier for more and more of the company to get behind it, right? Back to Erica's point in terms of all of these stakeholders, right? At the end of the day, if you get one part of the pipeline or one area really functioning well, then you can have that visibility in those conversations. You're saying, hey, look, this is great. Here's what we've done. I know that this is an input to your process. Like, how is there something that we can do to help you? Because if I help you, it helps me. It helps the entire company. And I think that's really what it is. You start by driving value in isolation. You grew. Again, you're in a risk constrained way, and then you prove it, and then you repeat it, and you repeat it, and you repeat it. And it really comes back to this idea of, how do you do digital transformation? How do you do it, right? At Workday, I observed a lot of companies who they just ate all of this technology, right? And it was this very kind of hungry caterpillar approach. And when it just didn't result in them turning into this deft, beautiful butterfly at the end. And I think you got to step back and really re-examine how you do it and do it one piece at a time. And again, software and technology comes to a fore, and there's great opportunities to find vendors like Modern Treasury in this case. Say, look, solve this one particular problem, but I also know you all have a lot else on in your suite that if you show me you can do this, then great. Let's start talking about the next piece in the pie or in the puzzle.
I'm curious, Brian, have you seen companies successfully introduce new infrastructure sequentially? Do you have a couple of examples you could share?
Yeah, I think going back to my time at Workday, I was brought over to lead a team who owned a lot of really core infrastructure. If you're familiar with Workday, like the inbox and comms and really that whole side. And it was an area that was just struggling for a lot of reasons. And it was an area where people said, hey, like, why can't I interact or get notifications through like kind of modern channels, right? And we were really focused on SMS. Molly, you'll be familiar with this. But because of that, it was going to fundamentally change the unit economics, right? Before you wrote a long-term contract, it was all baked in because it was an eat all eat as much as you can. It was all provided by Workday. Now we're talking about introducing a third-party vendor. And because of that, it really drove this idea of, hey, we need to come back and re-examine how we're going to do kind of subscription billing outside of like cart building or billing outside of our core contract. Workday had a kind of quasi subscription system at one point. It had fallen a little bit behind for lots of reasons. And we said, look, there's a great opportunity here to use this as a pushing point and say, look, we think this is going to be a business motion that we're going to continue. And you can see it even in AI and at ML today. And so I came to this team and I said, look, y'all, like, we're going to go and tackle this thing and work, which is, hey, like, how do we kind of build really effectively against, against this SMS without upsetting everything else that's going on in the play? And so we were able to reach to an outside vendor and say, hey, here's the thing. Because of course the initial inclination was like, let's build it internally. I was like, wait, hold on. There's all these other things that we as a business need to get done. And let's think outside the box a little bit. And so we were able to work with this outside vendor and say, here's our particular set of problems. There's a pretty tight timeline that we need to operate off of. You all seem to have just exactly what we want, but here's all the things that we need and here's where we're going. And we were able to, in a very short time period, resurrect a piece of that billing aspect, that working in terms of accounting for and billing against the SMS spend, and showed value, right? In a very short period of time. And I could then go back to my boss and say, look what we've done, right? And he's like, cool. Okay, what's next? And it was one of those before where I was met with skepticism because I don't know, working with an outside vendor and the build buy decision, we tend to do a lot of building. And again, it was one of those areas where things had come so far forward from when a lot of those decisions had been made that just being able to say, look, I'm going to focus on a very small area on a vendor to do this. And that vendor came through. And then we expanded our use cases with them and then started to get leveraged and used by more and more of the business, which was exciting.
Yeah, it's great. Erica, I'm sure you also have a few words to add there. So
Yeah, I would definitely echo a lot of the things that Brian said. I think that sort of, I would say pick your battles, but find the right moment and space for testing and having impact. And I think at Venmo, we had a great example of this where we wanted to launch a referral program and there was a skepticism, but we were aiming to meet a metric. We went out, we found a vendor to help support us. And we said, look, we're going to sign a relatively kind of short-term 1-year contract. We're going to go out. This is going to help us build this thing in 6 weeks. And we're going to know if it works. And I think exactly to Brian's point, it was one of those demonstrations of not only that, hey, this vendor is valuable and this program is valuable and let's go repeat it elsewhere, but this kind of action motion of short iterative bursts, even when it relates to buying, not just building, is an effective mechanism. I think a lot of times leadership does like the short iterative bursts. Hey, show me that this works. Let's not throw huge amounts of resources until we know. But people get scared when you try and do that with vendors. And I think this isn't always the right decision. Sometimes you really do need to go for that long-term partnership, build against a big contract and a long-term kind of perspective. But there can be times where that sort of, hey, we can get this in, demonstrate value really quickly is not something that always has to be a build decision. It can often be a buy decision as well. And we had a lot of success with that in the sort of product-led growth universe, both on payments related items, marketing related items, and just core user experience components. And I think it's also a great kind of way to really explore how you work with vendors as a company and what as a company and a culture is right for your organization. I think every company is different and learning what sort of the right balance is also really valuable, especially as an individual contributor or someone running a sort of medium-sized team in any of these companies. I think certainly for myself, running about a 20-person engineering team at Venmo was really valuable to figure out what was the right amount of build versus buy and what were the right moments to push on each of those levers.
For sure. And it's timely because we got a question from the audience who's asking, would you guys recommend enterprises work with consultants to innovate on payments? Maybe, I know, Erica, you were at McKinsey for a bit, so you probably have that unique perspective as well. So maybe we can start with you.
I think it really depends. Obviously, I have some consulting experience in my time. I think consultants can add value along a variety of pieces of the chain, right? From what's our strategy and where do we want to focus to the actual vendor selection to or build versus buy equation, all the way down to the actual tactical implementation. How do we actually structure our integration of a specific piece of software? And so I think, especially if you're new to payments, perhaps you're a company that has historically stayed out of the flow of funds or really focused on just providing services and not actually being the platform in which folks exchange money, deciding to step into that, either getting into the flow of funds yourself or stepping into the payments piece. I think Procore is a great example of that, going into the payments universe. I think those are moments where it can be valuable potentially to have a consultant and have that sort of expertise in the room, especially given the complex regulatory, legal compliance pieces that, especially as I said, if you're new to offering payments, can feel daunting and having that sort of trusted partner in the room can be really valuable.
Thanks. And just a quick reminder as we're wrapping up, I have one final question for the panelists, but don't forget to, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. I guess let's start, Erica. I'll stay on you, and then we'll definitely get Brian's input on this too. But we obviously have a lot of payment leaders in the audience today. So, what advice would you give them in terms of revamping and rebuilding their systems?
I think I would bucket into sort of revamping and rebuilding and this kind of you're getting into it for the first time. I think if you're revamping and you're rebuilding, be self-aware and acknowledge how daunting and scary it is to touch any part of one's payment stack. I think we all who've worked on payment stacks in different companies know how scary that can be because if something goes wrong, maybe money's getting lost. You've got 75,000 customer support calls because people didn't get the money they were expecting. And so I think starting by acknowledging that sort of risk and importance is really important that everyone in the room says, look, we know that this is scary and daunting, but we still believe that the value we can add by making improvements here is extremely critical. And here is all the ways that we're going to be bringing substantial value to the business and to our customers by making enhancements here. And so I think my second piece of advice for those sort of revamping is to focus on something that is really going to add meaningful either customer or business, and hopefully both at the same time, impact, because it makes that sort of risk reward trade-off for putting your toes in the water for the first time really worth it. And once you've done it, you've said, okay, we now know how to do this. We've done it effectively. We found the right partners and a Modern Treasury or whoever it is that you choose to work with. And now we feel confident that we can go and tackle some of those other pieces. And then I think, as I said, if you're new to adding payments to your software or your solution, I think that education piece, that learning piece, whether it's through consultants, through coworkers, through people that you've worked with in previous jobs, through the evaluation of vendors and learning from them was really valuable as well. And having a really strong perspective of what's most important to you, because the information deluge can be quite big, really coming in with that strong perspective of this is the goal we're trying to achieve. This is the type of payments we want to offer to our customers and why is really valuable. And I think the last thing is I think payments are really fun. Maybe that makes me a nerd, but I think as probably most of the people on this call feel similarly, I think it's really exciting. And there's so many unique pieces and challenges and opportunities to tackle that really drive the business forward that I think it's fun and exciting and definitely worth doing.
I think Erica covered it really well. But I guess one thing I would highlight is I think given how fast things are moving and where there's kind of opportunities, RTP, FedNow, there's just lots of interesting technologies coming online that are transforming payments, especially if you're, again, there's folks in the room that are very familiar with ACH, right, and latency and, on that. So many exciting things that can really, speed your business along. Again, it can be scary. It can be risky. Just getting all the right stakeholders in the room. And I think the thing that I've learned and just been watching some of how both, companies that we've been working with here at Modern Treasury do the full suites. They buy it all up front and they're building their businesses on. And then the folks who are going through more of this kind of traditional digital transformation it really is an opportunity to get folks in the room who probably haven't traditionally spoken to each other. And I think it really is this idea of, hey, engineering is and should be in service and really up the business, right? And hey, here's this finance team, right? And they're really trying to look forward. I've not been in a lot of places where the engineering team has spent time with the finance team and really understood their wants, needs, and where they're struggling, and vice versa. And so I think there's a really good opportunity to really build those connections, because I think it helps educate and really inform two very critical pieces that oftentimes don't talk in companies. But again, getting to this idea of like, how do you think about it holistically? How do you manage your risk? How do you understand what would be a small piece that you could bite off and get really great buy-in around? I think it's just that getting that kind of non-traditional set of stakeholders in the room to really to think about it, talk it out, and to witness the results together.
For sure. I think we're seeing that from a lot of our customers, is bringing those two groups together, finance and engineering. I know at our transfer conference, Hippo Insurance talked a bit about that, which is really interesting that we're seeing more of that collaboration across teams. We do have a couple questions for the panel. We will start with, how do you guys think about build versus buy when you don't see options out there that meet your needs, but your team is also not sure how to build on their own?
I'm always a big fan of phone a friend here. I think, I think there is, I've been an engineering leader for 15 plus years now at small companies, big companies. And this is a real struggle, right? And where I found myself early in my career is I have to solve all of this myself, right? I have to go and figure it out, because that's how I'm going to prove value to the company and show that I'm ready for a bigger role. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, actually, lots of people are facing the same struggle, and really going out and finding companies who are same industry or facing the same struggles, and just cold calling them on LinkedIn or cold messaging them on LinkedIn has been surprisingly effective to say, hey, you seem like you're in the same space as me. And what are some of the struggles you're facing, and how have you thought about them? And I've been really surprised about how open people are to like talk about it, both good and bad. Oh gosh, don't ever work with that person, or these people are wonderful, or yeah, here's how we disseminated it. And it's been that's really connected me with ideas, or even just got me out of my shell, or this kind of one world view, right? Which is, we got to build all the things, which is a natural engineering tendency, right? We're very visceral people.
Yeah, anything you would add, Erica?
Think so. I think it's really about, I think going back to the sort of like core competency question too, is this something that if we build and we build ourselves, we're going to want to maintain whatever it is, 10, 15, 20% of our engineering time dedicated to this in a given quarter, in a given cycle, in a given month? And if the answer to that question is no, I think even if you find a vendor that's only meeting 70% of your needs today, they're more likely to build that 30% than you are, because you probably want to focus on what your core business is. So I think that was often when I was working at Venmo, the trade we were making was, is this a core competency that we believe what we will build and what we will maintain and continue to feature enhance is going to be better than what we can find in the market and the teams that are building against that in the market. And sometimes you're going to find, if the buy solution is only meeting 40% of your needs, then probably you're going to have to build it most likely, because you're not going to get what you need. But if you're getting close to that 50, 60, 70%, the that team that you're buying from, that's all they do. That is all they're focused on. And so that is where they are going to be spending all their energy to get from that 70% to 100%. Whereas you are now going to have to start making that trade off to say, hey, do I want to spend my capacity getting this from 70% to 30% by building this thing from the ground up? Or would I rather spend that energy somewhere else? So I think it's really a question of how far off that vendor might be from where you want to be, and how core that capability is to the competencies that you have, and the competencies that you want to have as a business going forward.
And that was a great answer. But I think it's also folks very often underestimate the operational overhead. Practically every company I worked at, we're like, oh yeah, we'll build a thing and we operate it. And it's, oh boy, that's actually, now I need to have someone because our on call is too thin, or there's all these changes that, that kind of need to be absorbed. But that's definitely feels something you got to really ponder on.
Yeah, is it worth the opportunity cost of that time saved that you're getting or not?
Well, especially when you go into high growth, right? It's, wow, there's all this
Yeah,
thing.
for sure. I know that I worked with a lot of customers who said, yes, we'll go build it, probably because they thought they had to, and came back a year later maybe and said, we wish we would have done this from day one. But sometimes that's the learnings. Okay, I think we're going to wrap. We unless there's any more questions, we have one about a consultant and knowing the process. We'll get back to you on that. We'll follow up via email on that one from James. And if there aren't any more questions, maybe I'll give it 10 more seconds, but I don't see any coming in. We'll let everyone go. We hope you guys enjoyed the conversation today. And we thank you for being here on behalf of Modern Treasury. And hopefully we'll see you at the next Tech Talk. So have a good one.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Brian. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you.
Bye.